Hi, I'm Terri Conneran with KRAS Kickers, and welcome today to our expert session on learning about clinical trials. I'm a lung cancer patient, 9-year survivor, and started KRAS Kickers really to try and get a better understanding of what KRAS means for me as a patient. And I just wanted to be able to share that information with other people. We're around the world, and if you're here, we're delighted that you're here. But more importantly, this isn't about me. This is about us learning together side by side. And today I'm joined by Laura Macke, who is a nurse practitioner at Georgetown University and Lombardi Center. And you're up in the oh my gosh, I just blanked on it. I was going to say it too, Maryland, right? Like no, the DC area, right?
DC, correct.
DC
Yeah.
area, right? Okay, so you're in the DC area, and I should have known what I was going to say before I opened my mouth. But thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about clinical trials, which she's an absolute passionate about helping patients understand what that means, finding out how to get involved in clinical trial, if it's clinical trial is a good thing, and what that means for us as a patient. And so, Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to let you just kind of kick it off and let's get started and see what it is that we need to know about this.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. As Terry said, I am a nurse practitioner and I work on clinical trials at Georgetown, specifically the early phase clinical trials. I've been working in this space for over 10 years, initially as a clinical research nurse and then as a nurse practitioner for the last 5 years. As Terry said, I'm just really passionate about clinical trials, and I'm happy to be here today to talk about a little bit of clinical trial 101 and answer any kind of questions you guys have. I put together a couple slides just kind of as a framework to guide our conversation here today. Let me see if I can find the screen. Oh, here it is. Okay, sharing. Okay. All right, so let me switch to present mode. Okay. Can you guys see that? Great.
Yep,
Okay.
looks good.
Thanks. Okay. All right, so here's an overview. First, I just want to talk about the different phases of trials that exist. All drugs that are currently approved have to move through these phases of drug development before the FDA reviews and makes them accessible to patients throughout the country. So talk a little bit about what those phases look like and what they mean. And then we'll talk about how you find clinical trials that you might be looking for either as a patient or as a provider, trying to find the right trial. And then how we evaluate eligibility, and finally what it looks like to be a participant in a clinical trial. So I found this on the MD Anderson website, and I think it's a really nice, succinct summary of what the different phases of trials are. My work is primarily in phase one, phase two. In phase one, we are really trying to find the proper dose of a drug. We start with a dose escalation. So we start with a pretty low dose of a drug and incrementally increase that to the point where either we think we have enough saturation, we don't need to go further, or it becomes too toxic. So then we have our established drug in phase one. This is a small part of trials, usually, as you see here, only about 15 to 50 patients. That's a ballpark. And we kind of expand on that a little bit in phase one, usually. And from sometimes the phase two portion is actually incorporated into phase one. And sometimes it's a separate trial. But in phase two, what we're really focusing on is effectiveness and side effects. So we're trying to see if patients are having benefit clinically from these new drugs, and what kind of side effect profile we're looking at. So we saw some of that in phase one, but really honing in more on it in phase two. And then in phase three, this is where these are the larger scale trials where you're comparing the new treatment to an existing treatment, kind of head to head to see if there is benefit to adding this new drug into the mix. And then eventually, phase four is after the drug is approved and available, and we're just looking at long-term side effects.
Before we just move on, can I ask a quick question?
Of course, yeah.
Because you mentioned that sometimes trials are combined like a phase one, phase two. It's like a combo thing.
Mhm.
Why would they do that? And is there some sort of a difference?
Good question. When you're building a clinical trial protocol, it's extremely complicated, and there's a lot of moving parts in terms of institutional review board IRB approvals, getting different vendors involved. And so sometimes in the interest of, planning longer term, a sponsor might decide that we'll just kind of plan these two phases under one protocol rather than planning to make two separate protocols. Sometimes, they it's a phase A, 1B kind of combo where it's really more just focused on that early phase. And then they decide what they're going to do from there with the drug and do a separate phase two protocol. So it really just depends on the sponsor and what their, sometimes it's money or sometimes it's just what their overarching goals are for the trials.
So essentially, does it speed things up or slow things down for the trial process?
It's probably slower up front to plan out both phases, but I think that it does help in terms of moving things along a little more quickly. If it's all approved up front, and then you don't have to go through the steps to get a second protocol approved. So,
Okay, thank you.
sure, yeah. So, I guess one thing that comes up a lot in talking about clinical trials, patients want to know how they can find out about clinical trials. And to be honest, there's just a very heavy reliance on oncologists and their professional networks. A lot of the clinical trials that are open are at academic centers. So some of the community doctors may not be aware of ongoing trials, but a lot of them are, and a lot of them have relationships with academic centers to kind of collaborate on patient care. And sometimes it's patient driven. Patients can go out on clinicaltrials.gov and look for trials for themselves. As healthcare providers, we use that website as well. And sometimes social media, word of mouth, patient advocacy, and support groups. These are ways that our trials are sometimes how patients find their ways to us, I should say.
Moment of self-promotion, because
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we really focus on is getting information out there for patients and what's happening for KRAS clinical trials. And one of the things that we'll kind of get to here is just because I have a mutation doesn't necessarily mean I need a targeted therapy for my mutation. It's one of the parts of calculating it.
Mhm.
And the clinicaltrials.gov is kind of messy to go through. But so
Mhm.
we're all trying to figure out better ways to figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a perfect website by any stretch, but it is often a good jumping off point. And I think that is a nice transition into this slide here to talk about some of the challenges that we have. So when I say site accessibility, I'm referring to a site as a hospital or a clinic, a location where they have the trial. So that would be the site. So on clinicaltrials.gov, you can see how many centers have a particular trial open and where those centers are located, so that it can be helpful. Um, Now, the things that aren't so clear from that website, things that you really don't know unless you are seeing a physician or a provider who works on a particular clinical trial, would be how do the active sites access these enrollment slots? Because there's not an infinite number of patients that can go into these trials. There's caps on number of patients that can enroll, and and I think that's not something that you know unless you see a healthcare provider who's working on it. And sometimes it can be very competitive. Sometimes we're guaranteed slots as a site, but more often than not, it's, who has the patients who can request the slots, and that's how it's assigned out that way. Um, Similarly, the clinicaltrials.gov site doesn't really indicate how far along you are in enrollment in a particular study. So it may look like it's still recruiting, but that might not be entirely accurate. A lot of times there's different arms and cohorts in within a trial, and they could be disease specific or mutation specific. And some of those cohorts fill up faster than others. So maybe the cohort you thought you could go into is actually closed. Or maybe there was a recent amendment to the protocol that impacted the eligibility criteria. And now that the protocol is often a living, breathing, set of rules that we have to follow, right? And so it can be pretty strict, but it doesn't. It can change from time to time, and when that change and those changes happen in something we call amendments, and sometimes those can be broad sweeping amendments where the eligibility criteria has changed, and maybe that's not been updated on the clinicaltrials.gov website. And then another thing we want to think about is what data is available. So in my trials in the early phase, often we don't know a lot. A lot of them are first in human, so we're really learning as we go. But in the later phase trials, often there has been some data published in terms of efficacy or toxicity, or at least within the sponsor, they know more about the drug. So these are things to consider. Okay, so let's say you have done your research, you've spoken with your healthcare providers, and you've found a trial that you think you want to be considered for. So each trial has different eligibility criteria. Their inclusion/exclusion criteria. Often it is based on what type and stage of cancer the patient has. How many prior lines of therapy has the patient received? We have some studies, for example, that patients could have up to 2 prior lines, or they can't have any prior treatment. So it really varies from trial to trial. Performance status is a big evaluating factor, and so typically we use an ECOG scale for this. I'm just going to pivot here real quick to show you what that looks like, because I think not everybody knows what ECOG is, especially in outside of the oncology world. So the ranges from 0 to 5. So ECOG 0, you're basically, if you feel exactly the same as you did before your cancer diagnosis, you're still working, you're still doing everything that you were doing before without restrictions. ECOG 1, you might have a little bit of an impact. Maybe some of the more physical, strenuous stuff is challenging for you, but you're still ambulatory, able to do work around the house, maybe some office work. And ECOG 2, you're still able to take care of yourself, able to bathe and get dressed and cook for yourself, and you're up out of bed for more than half of the day, but you're not really working, you're not doing anything extra beyond what you have to be doing. So most trials would require a performance status of 0 to 2. So that is something to keep in mind as well. So going back to this list of criteria, and so I work in solid tumors, and so in solid tumors, often we use something called RECIST to evaluate patients' response on their scans. And RESIST stands for Response Evaluation Criteria in Solid Tumors. So it's a long, complicated guideline that we have to follow in terms of what the definitions are of measurable disease. And most trials in the solid tumor space would require that. It's different in hematology, it's different in neuro-oncology, but in my line of work, RESIST is what we most commonly use. In terms of labs, that really also varies from protocol to protocol. I would say, a hemoglobin of 9 is pretty standard minimum in what I see. Platelets around 100 or higher. And then, of course, we're thinking about liver and kidney function and what those criteria look like for the study. We also want to think about what other comorbid conditions patients have. A lot of times we'll see exclusions around patients who have severe cardiac conditions, active infections, or autoimmune diseases. And kind of along those lines, what medications does the patient take? And that includes both prescribed and over the counter. And have they recovered from any lingering toxicities if they've received prior treatment, or have they ever had a really terrible reaction to a prior treatment that we need to know about and be concerned about when we're thinking of the mechanism of action of the drug that we're going to give. This is in place just as a safety measure. And then I think probably most importantly, this is what I always really focus in on when I'm going through consents with patients. Do they fully understand what the risks are and the requirements, and would enrollment align with their goals? The participation is totally voluntary throughout the trial, and it's important that patients have all the information that they need up front, and we share that all the information we have with them in a IRB approved informed consent. So
Okay, I already heard you mention IRB approved, I think twice. Can you just
Mhm.
kind of like glaze through that?
Yeah. So, institutional review boards are either centrally based or university based. And these are the folks who are looking at a clinical trial from an institution standpoint to say, is this a safe, well-written protocol that patients can go on? That we feel is a responsibly written protocol. The scientific rationale is reasonable, and you're not, putting patients unnecessarily at risk.
So it's kind of an outside source, another set of eyes checking it
Another
out.
set of eyes, exactly.
Okay.
The important set of eyes that tells us whether or not we can even do a trial. So,
Well, like the checks and balances, it doesn't matter what it is, right?
mhm,
Obviously, there's checks and balances that need to kind of go on, especially when you're talking about our health.
exactly, exactly.
Okay. I'm gonna let you keep going. I could just jump in and ask questions, and it's my nature to jump in and ask questions. All right. Well, since I already stopped you, I'm gonna go. Okay,
Okay.
because the term like enrollment is
Mhm.
a little deceiving.
Okay.
Because when I think enrollment, I think like, our annual enrollment for our health insurance or something, or getting like, my new car insurance or something. Can you
Mhm.
just like the terminology clarify it just a little bit so we know what you're talking about and get on the same page?
Right. Okay. Great, great, great question. So that kind of feeds into this next slide. So I'll just pull it up while I answer the question. So to enroll in a clinical trial, you need to go through the screening period to make sure that it's safe for you to enroll and that you meet the criteria established by the sponsor. So the first phase before enrollment is really to have that informed consent discussion that I mentioned. And then after that, we need to do several protocol specific assessments. And that depends again on the particular protocol. So you might need an echocardiogram, you might need a new CT scan, you might need a brain MRI. And so after you do all of those things and we confirm that you're eligible for enrollment, that's when the enrollment starts, so that you're eligible to safely receive the study drug within the parameters of how the clinical trial sponsor has written this particular protocol. So after the screening period would be when we move into the enrollment and treatment. And I think that that can has a high level of variability from protocol to protocol. I think in the early phase trials, we're so focused on safety that we really want to see you like a lot. So you may have extra visits for labs and safety checks. We're also looking at something called pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, which is what is the drug doing in your body and what is your body doing to the drug. So this is blood draws that we do after dosing. And especially this is really common in the early phase trials. So there may be times in the beginning where you get your treatment and then we ask you to stay for 8 hours afterwards and have repeat blood draws, come back the next day just for a blood draw. So you need you need to understand the level of involvement that can be beyond what you would expect in a standard of care. And in
The
some
earlier
trials,
trials, there's a little bit more necessary, a lot more required of me as a patient as far as getting my blood drawn, being there, coming into the clinic, because it's newer in this study, and so we're watching it more intensely. You
yes.
are watching it more intensely on me, the body, the patient.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. And some trials do require inpatient admissions. Some of these newer drugs that we're seeing, like T-cell engagers, things that can have a delayed severe reaction that we want to be monitoring you more closely. But that's not every trial. Most trials that I work on are done in the outpatient environment. So while you may have to spend a lot of time with us at first, you do get to go home and sleep in your own bed. And then, then we're monitoring you on the trial. We're doing radiographic assessments, so CT scans, brain MRIs, whichever is appropriate for your particular case, but it is on a protocol defined schedule. So oftentimes, we'll continue treatment up to a CT scan. If that CT scan looks good and you're tolerating treatment well, then we continue for the time period that we're allowed to continue based on the protocol. So there is a lot more to it. I think that as you said, like we are asking kind of a lot more of our patients. I know at Georgetown, we do our best to try to ease some of the burden of this. We have amazing study coordinators who help schedule all the appointments because you can imagine it's so much to keep track of, right? So to have someone really there kind of holding your hand, giving you a calendar, saying, these are when your appointments are, and we do ask you to be compliant with those things and we have some flexibility, but there's a little more, I think, hand holding in the research world because we are on such a set schedule as that the protocol requires.
Well, you're trying to schedule a lot of different things, and we're not the only person going through like a CT scan or something. So there's that
Mhm.
end of it as well, the logistical end of it.
Right. And of course, we're pulling all the strings to minimize the number of visits you have to come in. Like, I not have to have you come back one day for a CT, one day for an echo, one day for labs. And sometimes there are multiple visits required, but that having someone there who's really trying to consolidate things for you is something I know our patients appreciate. And then I would say just a quick note here about the follow-up period. I think most trials I work on require a safety visit or two after the end of treatment just to monitor to see if there's any late onset side effects, make sure the side effects that you were having, if you were having any side effects, have resolved. And then there's a survival follow-up period where usually that's just like a phone call every 3 months or a check-in, like if it's a referral from another oncologist, reach out to them. How's that patient doing? Or a lot of times, you continue your care within our own institution. So that's the easy part, I think, compared to the rest of this. But That's kind of the timeline and the overarching phases of the clinical trial participation. So I didn't have any more slides. I kind of just wanted to
Okay.
throw that out there and then we could
You're
talk.
doing great. No, honestly, I think the slides are fantastic, and it kind of helps like see the lay of the land of what it is that's happening and where things are going.
Mhm,
So, but then from there, it gets down to brass tacks. Okay, it's like we know what they are, we know where it is I'm looking, and what I kind of gathered already from just what you said is like the earlier it is in a clinical trial phase, like a phase one trial, for example, I'm going to have to be back and forth to the clinic a lot more often, which
mhm,
means the closer you live, the easier it's just going to be. That's just a practical thing,
mhm.
just in general. So,
And I think that's part of the performance status requirement as well too. Like, got to be able to come in, and I know it can be so hard to, if you're not at your usual physical capabilities to be going back and forth to the hospital all the time.
well, and to be honest, I've been through treatment and it's not really motivating to go back there and feel lousy. And so you have to know that you're going to be doing better, right? And so that's just the practical end of it. And as complicated as it is on, getting the trials and all that sort of stuff from that end,
Mhm.
whether it's childcare or somebody laying the dog out or, the transportation or even something as simple. I had my nest was empty, as easiest as life could be for me. But just going in for radiation, by the time you get in the car, you get up there, and the radiation session itself, I don't think was 5 whole minutes. Okay.
Mhm.
But all the other stuff, it took half a day. And
Mhm.
that's as short a period of time as it could be. So it is one of the things that it has an impact. And so thank you for calling it out because I think sometimes we feel like it's being missed or just presumed that it's like, well, it's no big deal. You're here anyway. It's like, well, I didn't want to really be here to begin with.
I know, and inevitably there's always delays one way or another. In a perfect world, everyone would be seen exactly at their clinic time, but the cases get
Well,
complicated and things get behind, and so
but in order to have that perfect world, that means I also have to show up on time.
mhm.
So we have to start there. So anyway, all right. So let me hit you up with just a couple of questions because we already had a couple of people that were asking questions,
Okay, great.
and I think that they're really valid. Talk a little bit about like placebos. Is that like a real thing? Talk to me about it?
Great question. So, in the early phase trials, there's no such thing as placebo. You are getting the drug 100%. When you are talking about a later phase trial and you're comparing a standard of care regimen to the experimental drug, um, that is the real standard of care regimen you would get. There is no scenario in which you would be getting no drug, right? So I think, for example, about there was a trial done in small cell, just for example, in Empower 133, and it was looking at um, adding atezolizumab to chemotherapy in the induction phase of that treatment. And so the patients who were assigned the combination got atezolizumab in addition to what the standard of care was at the time, which was just platinum etoposide. And then the control arm, those patients, they still got the platinum etoposide, they just didn't get the atezolizumab. So they got a placebo. So they were still getting the treatment that they would have gotten off trial, and they were getting a placebo with it, but they were certainly still getting active cancer treatment.
Okay, so what I heard you just say
Mhm.
is that I'm getting a treatment. I'm getting an actual medication. It's not like I'm thinking in my mind somebody's giving me a sugar pill. I'm actually getting a
Absolutely
treatment.
not.
And so I'm definitely getting a treatment, but depending on and definitely very much so in the earlier phase trials. In one of
Mhm.
the later phase trials where they're comparing you to standard of care versus the not standard of care, you kind of know, I mean, if you're getting standard of care or not. Is that
Right.
There,
Right.
is that open? Is that what that means?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so there is sometimes blinding in the studies, where the blinding is either happening on the patient level, and you may not know if you're getting the drug or not. And sometimes the blinding happens just on the sponsor side, where there are people who are looking at it, they don't know, if you're getting the placebo or the real drug. So there could certainly be a case where you were not getting the experimental drug and you didn't know. But oftentimes, we're able to kind of figure it out. But um, yeah, so it really depends on the study. But I would just say that you are getting a treatment.
You're getting a treatment, you're getting a cancer treatment. Okay.
Right. Mhm.
All right. And then once somebody brought up it's a great question about chemo and washout periods. Can you kind of like talk through what is a washout period? What does that look like? And where's chemo fall within this?
Yeah, great question. So it really, again, is kind of protocol dependent, but in general, the washout periods are time from last dose of your last regimen, until your first dose of the new regimen on the clinical trial. And how much time has to pass between your last dose of treatment and starting the trial. And usually it depends, again, on the study, but it can be anywhere in the 2 to 4 week range, for drug, for radiation, for surgeries. Sometimes with the medications, we look at something called half-life with it, which is, how quickly the drug is getting out of your body or metabolized. And so it might be 5 half-lives, instead of 2 weeks, whichever is shorter or whichever is longer. Again, depending on how it's written. But that is something that we keep in mind. And sometimes, if we have patients who are on a targeted therapy, we time out their enrollment in a way to say, okay, keep on that drug until the very last second. So we will tell you to stop on this day, and that will be our 10 days before we could start. So that's something you would work with your provider on to make sure the
Okay.
timing was in
Well,
line with what the
why do
study
they have a
wanted.
washout period?
Well, it's for safety reasons and also toxicity reasons, or in terms of evaluating adverse events, I should say. So we want to make sure you've recovered from your last treatment. We don't want to risk an interaction with the new treatment.
Okay. And then how does like going from like a first trial to a second trial look?
I think just like any other like treatment change, I think all these variables that we're talking about, washout periods, screening periods, that would apply in terms of if you were going from one trial to the next. And each trial, as I mentioned earlier, does just some care more about number of prior lines than others. They often will specify that very clearly in the protocol. So.
So it's all in the details.
All in the details.
All of the details, right? The
Mhm.
devil's in the details, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And so if I find a trial that I think I'm perfect for,
Okay.
okay, or the trial is perfect for me, what is the first step I do? What is the thing I need to do?
Well, if you've found the trial, perhaps you found it on clinicaltrials.gov,
Or the
or
KRAS kickers.
or KRAS Kickers. And so again, I think you would look and see where the nearest location to you is. Reach out to that location. We have patient navigators who will often obtain records and share them, with the study team to, arrange a consult to review to say, could this really be a potential trial for you? In general, I advise patients, even if you are going to be getting your health care in somewhere local to you in a community hospital, maybe they don't, or a community clinic, and they don't have the trial. I always suggest just getting a second opinion at an academic center just to get in the door, early on. You might not need a trial right now, but to hear what the other options are out there, to have that relationship already established if and when you do want to pursue a trial, I think can be really helpful. So while you don't want to be bopping around going to every cancer center in the country, getting a second opinion or maybe even a third, just to have another window open when you need it.
Okay, and so it really is okay to get the second opinion.
I would strongly recommend a second opinion. Yes.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that surprised me is that finding the clinical trial, just because I find something doesn't mean it's available everywhere.
Correct.
And there's a different number of slots at each individual location. And even within, like, say, a big system. Can you just kind of like explain through that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So there's different types of trials, in addition to all the different phases, right? There are institutional studies and there are pharmaceutical studies. So at Georgetown, we call them IITs, investigator initiated trials. We have a lot more control over those slots because, it's a study at our institution, and often, we might have a couple other sites as satellites or cooperative type relationships with other facilities, but we're talking about much smaller numbers of sites and like much less competition. When you're talking about these bigger pharmaceutical studies, there could be many sites throughout the country, sometimes throughout the world. And all these sites are competing for a limited number of slots, usually. So a lot of it just comes down to kind of timing and luck of the draw of if it's available at any given moment. So again, I think that's why it's really helpful to establish that initial consult at a facility that does trials, whether it's an NCI designated cancer center or a big academic cancer center, just so that they have you on their list. If there's something that comes along and and you need something and they have a slot and the stars all align, it's a little daunting to think of it that way, but unfortunately, sometimes how it works. It just has to be the right place
Well,
at the right
and
time.
yeah, well, I mean, that brings up a really valid point. You talk about like competitive for slots, right? Well, there are clinical trials for KRAS patients, and there's waiting lists for us to get on the
Yes,
trials.
yes.
Um, can you just like explain a little bit about the visibility of what you know or what we can find out and what that looks like from a practical standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for us, there's nothing more frustrating than knowing there's a really great trial, and some of our patients would do so well on this trial, and there's just no slots. And we work with these sponsors, and their hands are tied as well. There's only so many. The protocol that they wrote defines how many patients they can put on. There's statistical analysis being done based on the number of patients that they said they were going to put on. So the wait list thing, unfortunately, we do have to do it a lot of times. We would submit kind of de-identified characteristics of a patient to a sponsor, say, can we get this patient on the wait list? And then it's just a matter of when the slots become available.
And then as like there are trials that are ongoing, and I know people are on these waiting lists, and does it mean I shouldn't consider something else just because I'm on the waiting list? What should I do if I am on a waiting list?
Yeah, a great question. I would never really recommend waiting for on a wait list and doing nothing else, unless you really had nothing else. But I think it's always worth exploring other options, other trials. If there's another standard of care option, I think doing something is generally better than just waiting.
Well, I mean, waiting sucks. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter
yeah.
at all, and it doesn't matter what it is. And a lot of times there's just even waiting for your washout period so you can begin something that you are eligible for. That can
Mhm.
be like, I mean, we're all playing beat the clock.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of the things that it's just, you don't realize how hard it is until you're going through it,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. So with the whole screening process, um, if you let's see, actually somebody asked this question for the screening process. If you're seen in a different hospital, do you need to make an appointment with the trial site hospital?
Yes, yes. You do need to and do the screening period at the site. So that being said, if you've had a recent CT scan, for example, and we see you the next week, and usually a screening window, again, it varies, but generally we have about 4 weeks of a screening window. So if we can get you started and you already had a CT scan in that window, we don't necessarily have to repeat it. So if you did something as standard of care and it falls in the screening window, more often than not, that's okay. We can use it. The thing we cannot do is have you do something just for the trial before you sign the consent with us at the hospital where we're running the trial. That is not good clinical practice. That is not something that we are allowed to do, and we actually could get into quite a bit of trouble if that was found out to have happened. So sometimes there is the opportunity, say if you need an echocardiogram to go on the trial. Oh, we don't have any appointments for 2 weeks, but you happen to have a cardiologist and you signed the consent already, so you go see the cardiologist to do the echocardiogram sooner. As long as you get those results to us, we can often use them. The
Well,
other
when it
thing that
comes, sorry.
sorry, was just one last thought was just that and I don't want to go into too much detail on this, is insurance and grants. So when you go on a clinical trial, particularly the pharmaceutical companies, they will often pay for a lot of these tests that you need while you're screening and enrolled in the trial. But if they are paying for it, it has to be done at the site where you're enrolling in the trial. If in the echocardiogram example, if your cardiologist said they could do it, your insurance would have to agree to pay for it because the trial can't pay for something that happens outside of the where we have the budget and contract established for the trial at our hospital. So I know it's a little bit weird to think about it that way, but essentially, if your insurance company is willing to cover some of these things, it's okay to do them outside after you've signed the consent form.
So my kids are right. Everything is either a math problem or a legal problem.
Yep,
Pretty
certainly.
much it simplifies everything, right?
Yep.
Well, and if you're in the clinical trial, it's not covering, there's no guarantee that your insurance is covering parts of it or any of it. It's really specific to that specific trial.
Right, right. And some insurance companies will require you to get their approval to enroll in any trial. That's not always the case. Usually it's okay to enroll in a trial. But it's every little thing that we do is a budget line. So this lab is billed to your insurance. This lab is billed to the grant for the trial. So it's down to that level of challenging billing. It's always easier if you have a pharmaceutical company who says, we're just going to pay for everything. So great. But sometimes, the clinic visit might go to your insurance and the scan might go to the grant. So it's really variable and it depends on the budget that was worked out with the sponsor and the institution.
Well, it's that end of it, but it's also like whatever they put through, whatever protocol that they put through to get FDA approval, because presumably, like that's the goal is for it to work and then
Mhm.
be approved and move forward, like with the signed, sealed, delivered stamp of approval. But if you change anything through the process, it jeopardizes the whole thing.
Mhm. Right. Mhm.
So again, it's a math problem or a legal problem.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that covers it. But you talked about the screening. Is that something that we can do through virtual screening? Is that, or do we have to actually show up everywhere?
Good question. It's generally all in person. We need to do a full physical exam in person as part of screening. The blood work, obviously, you have to come in person and the scans, and there's really very little we can do virtually.
Well, I thought I'd ask. I was hoping you'd be like, oh no, there's these changes happening so soon.
I think some institutions have, they allow like remote consenting where you could go through the consent form in a virtual visit and, obtain consent virtually. We are not there at my institution at the moment. So really everything does have to be done in person for us.
No, we're getting there. We're getting there. Something good
Yeah.
came out of COVID, right? Okay, now if somebody like specifically at Georgetown, okay, if there's a trial that's open that I think is a good fit for me,
Mhm.
what should be the thing that I should actually do?
Have you seen someone at Georgetown yet?
Well, let's just go theoretically, no.
Okay. Okay. So what you would do for Georgetown is you would reach out to the nurse. Well, let me back up. So essentially, oftentimes on clinicaltrials.gov there is an investigator listed and a study coordinator listed. So the first step would probably be to reach out that through that venue to see if you can get a brief like, hey, is this trial even open still kind of thing, like are you still looking for patients, and then we would say yes or no, and if yes, we would connect you with our nurse navigators who would get your records, get you set up for a consult with one of the physicians who works as an investigator on that trial. And so then you would come in for your consultation. We review all your records, we go through your history, physical exam. And if we feel that, it looks like on paper so far you could be a candidate, then we have you start the screening process. Often if we have not already sent you the consent form in advance to review, we give it to you at that initial consult and then bring you back in to later after you've had time to think about it, after you've had time to talk to your friends and family and do your research, do your thought thinking on, what questions you have about the trial. And so part of that, what I was saying earlier, really, do you really understand what's involved in this trial? And if after all that, we sign the consent forms and then we get you linked up with our study coordinator team, who will arrange all the screenings, tests, and appointments for you.
Okay, and then like a lot of us well, not a lot of us, some of the people that are like have like a KRAS mutation or something else, they've been on some sort of a specific inhibitor. They've been on a targeted therapy,
Mhm.
which makes finding the next trial perhaps more difficult.
Mhm.
Um, so what would somebody like one of the nurse navigators, or what would somebody at Georgetown, or what would you do to help us find like those next steps?
Mhm. Right. So again, it's something that's very protocol variable, right? Like the what can you have had already and what could you not? So if one trial was not a good option for you, but it was happened to be the one that you reached out to us about, we might say, actually that one's not going to work, but we have XYZ options. Or, we really don't have anything right now. Would love to have you come in for a consult, but time is precious. And if you are not wanting to come now and we don't have anything immediately available, feel free to reach out again later, and see if anything's changed.
Well, well, it's not necessarily just what's there is stagnant. It's a dynamic list.
Exactly.
And so they're
Exactly.
posting, okay, pharmaceutical companies, different sponsors are posting different trials regularly.
Absolutely.
And they're making, you know, coming up with different protocol versions of it. And so if you've been on a specific, say, like if you've been on one of the drugs that is an inhibitor or what have you, then there are trials out there that are being developed for
Hmm.
that next step. And so it doesn't mean you're done necessarily done yet. But it
Right.
just helps that if you can kind of like look forward and be strategic about, treatment
Yeah.
option.
And I would say I don't I know every institution kind of does things a little differently. But for ours in our phase one group, if you have a consult with one of our physicians or you are already one of their patients, and they think you might need a trial soon, we keep a list, like a running list of potential patients, patients who need something now, patients who might need something later. And as we have slots become available and new trials open, we go through this list and say, okay, could this be an option for that person? No, okay, and kind of go down the list that way. Which is why I say I think that getting in for even an initial consult, I think is really important because you can get on that kind of list where maybe you don't need something right now, or maybe you do. But to be looped in a group that is actively looking to put patients on trials and find that match with the patient and the trial is really a critical step in finding the right trial.
Well, because that's a lot of it. It's not necessarily I need anything, I need the right thing.
Right,
And as a
exactly.
patient, you need the right thing, the right treatment, and the right next treatment for
Absolutely.
you, depending on your situation.
And we like again, we ask so much of patients who go on a trial, it better be for a good reason. I mean, we can't guarantee things with trials, but we really don't want you doing something that at the end of the day is going to do more harm than good, is going to take away the time you have. We want to be giving you the best options we can. Often these drugs coming down the pipeline are not available for years on end until these trials are completed. Getting patients the best drugs now, that's really our goal. And sometimes, it's a targeted therapy. Sometimes there's a good scientific rationale. Sometimes it's a Hail Mary, and patients are just saying, let's go, let's do it. I want to try it. It's very patient dependent. So what is the right trial for the right patient?
Well, I think that the whole process, and I'm not afraid to just call how truly ignorant I was about the whole process. I really had no idea that as a patient, I need to qualify, that there's a whole
Hmm.
eligibility criteria, that it's not like they're just going up there and mixing something in a cauldron. They're really actually making it actually compares, they want to make a comparison of
Hmm.
other people similar to it. And that felt very calming to hear that that's actually there's logic behind it. It's not the randomness,
Right. Yeah.
and then they can learn from that. So, well, and as these trials are getting, and you're talking about being on the waiting list and having that other, the other lines of therapy or the other like actually the whole team, right? Because you guys you have a lot of people. You have a whole team like looking at it and reviewing it, and because you're looking for different combinations of things for a patient. That's also the time that it's okay for you to be getting those other treatment, getting the like another opinion or reviewing other things. Doesn't mean just
Mhm.
stop your treatment.
Right. Right. I again, that is my general feeling. I would say perhaps a caveat would be if you are looking at a trial that caps number of prior lines at three, and you've had three, and if you go and do something else, you would be disqualified from that trial. So really, that becomes a discussion with the provider and the patient to say what are the odds that this slot actually comes through? Like kind of hedge your bets, if you will, which is a terrible way to think of it when you're talking about your life and your health. But really, that risk benefit balance of saying, is this worth waiting a little longer for? Can I wait a little longer? Do I need to start something else now? So these are all important considerations to have with your healthcare team.
Well, it really is, it's very strategic
Hmm.
and very, you have to be very intentional about it through the course of it. And so I think that that's one of the things that really underscores the importance of getting another opinion from
Hmm.
another professional that's an expert in your area of types of cancer.
Hmm.
But when you are seeing these trials and you're seeing things and you're, say, on a waiting list, can you, as the institution, or can the pharmaceutical company, who can see the number of slots that are open at a certain place?
So generally we get, it depends on the sponsor, but we get somewhat regular updates from them as to what's available at a given moment. And we have access to staff within on the trial side to say, you know, I'm always emailing people, hey, are there slots? Hey, are there slots? You know, like we have that connection. We can ask, and it might not always be crystal clear when a slot's going to come down the pipeline, but we often have a general sense of whether or not it's realistic that we'll be getting a slot soon or not.
And sometimes it's just, it's the whole waiting game is just you got to keep on waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. And then different, okay, so there are, cancer's not as simple, what is it? Hickman's equation, like you can have, patients have more than one disease. We're not just a simple being. And a lot of times we have more than one cancer. It may
Mhm.
not necessarily, it may be a different mutation, it may different be a different type of cancer.
Mhm.
What does that look like as far as the clinical trial process?
So, true concurrent malignancies, like say breast cancer and colon cancer occurring at the same time or within 2 or 3 years of each other. That is sometimes part of exclusion criteria in a trial. Um, that being said, often there's language that says if the disease has been curatively treated within more than 3 or 5 years ago, for example, more and more women are surviving breast cancer and have a 20-year remote history, thank God, so that often doesn't impact. In terms of variability within a certain tumor type, I think that there are some trials that are focused on certain mutations and certain trials that do not want patients with certain mutations. And so it would depend on how the criteria was written for the trial. Because I think more and more in the age of precision medicine, we are really honing in on these variations and mutations and amplifications and all these different ways that cancer finds ways of growing. And so I think a lot of it has to do with do we think the drug would work in a certain population? And that's really what often is driving whether or not those things are allowed.
Well, and you brought up a point earlier. You're talking about like solid tumors and different ways of targeting the cancer. It's not necessarily through that targeted therapy. It
Mhm.
may be it may be a pathway drug or something that is slightly different than what it is that we're thinking, right?
Mhm.
It's not like an, well, I don't know. It's not always a magic bullet for a specific mutation.
Right, right. Where you can't just like plug it in. This is this goes
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'd
Not always.
love that, but it's
Right.
not always the case. And, in, well, lung cancer particularly, there's a lot of, or melanoma and other cancers, there's a lot that goes on with like immunotherapy and other lines of therapy that are not necessarily targeted. And those are clinical trials as well. And so, if would you kind of like just address the general things as far as like if I have a tumor, a solid tumor, what are the different things I might want to be looking for in my quest for a trial, my quest for consideration of a trial?
I think that's a really tough question. I think it depends what your goals are, what's available, what you are willing to risk benefit balance for yourself. Yeah, how often you are willing to come to a cancer center, how far do you live from the cancer center? We have some of these trials, as I said, you're pretty regular visits, and that just might not be possible for you. So I think that having an open dialogue with your oncologist and getting that second opinion at an NCI designated cancer center or a large academic institution to help you sort out what the options look like and what it is what is your goal at the end of the day.
I think that's well said. I think that's well said. Now, as it relates to phase 1 trials, are you seeing a lot more phase 1 trials kind of coming online, or is it just like I'm noticing more because now I'm doing this?
Well, I've only really ever worked in phase 1 trials. So, so to me, there's always with studies. No, I think it's a really exciting time in oncology research. I think there are some brilliant scientists out there in the world coming up with all new ideas and great strategies and we've had so many drug approvals in the last decade or so. It's really been fantastic, and they all started in phase 1, right? As I mentioned in the beginning, I think that because every drug does start in phase 1, I think that it's all worth considering. I think there's a lot of hesitancy about going in a phase 1 trial, even within the oncology community sometimes. I think patients are sometimes dissuaded from considering those types of trials. And again, they're not for everyone, but for the right patient, I've seen some amazing things. I worked on one of the trials when before atezolizumab was, where it is today. Was just a bunch of letters and numbers. It didn't have a drug name. It was,
Yeah.
and it's always so exciting when you actually can see it go from that early phase into full development and an FDA approval. So all these drugs started in phase 1. So a lot of exciting things happening, a lot of new drugs. So I think it's always worth considering.
Oh, it is. And again, it's like, and then you hear about like waiting lists and we're on the waiting list. And it's like, well, how do I deal with the waiting list? Well, what do I do about it while I'm on this waiting list?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it boils down to what you keep repeating in some version or another. It's open communication,
Mhm.
staying aware, and being intentional about but what you have going on in your life and what you're like capable of doing. They could have a cure for cancer in, I don't know, wherever, Timbuktu, and I can't get there.
Mhm.
Okay, or I just don't want to go up there because my family's here and I want to be here.
Right.
And so I think that's part of like, coming up to, the reality of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if they're in the meantime, while you're on a waiting list for something, be intentional with your time. And just from this patient to another patient who is asking that question, don't waste today worrying about tomorrow. Enjoy today.
Mhm.
Okay. And that is incredibly hard to say, and it's even harder to do. But
Mhm.
I'm saying that from my heart because, like, there's so many times I've looked back and it was like, I wish I didn't waste that time
Mhm.
worrying about something that I had no change over. Now, that being said, every time I get a scan, I'm still an anxious mess.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But well, it's a thing,
The
and
anxiety, I know, I know
it's a
it.
real life thing.
Yeah.
And we talk about it, we know about it, and until I went through it, I I just thought, oh, that's just like whatever. That's just somebody being dramatic. Get over yourself,
Oh,
really. And it's
no, yeah.
not. It is like it's an internal like thing that just kicks off on your body. And I know all the right things to say to
Mhm.
myself. And I
Mhm.
tell it to other people, and it's like, oh, it's such a gift. I get to look inside and I get to know what's going on and I can make a plan and all these other things. I know all that.
Mhm.
And I think back to like my mom died from cancer in 92. And like scans were just coming online. And so you really didn't know too much until it was really too late.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it really is an amazing thing that we've had. And at one point, those things were being tested too. Because they don't just come on like it wasn't like
Oh,
boom, magic happened and then screening and scans showed up everywhere. So,
absolutely.
there's part of that, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I have a couple other kind of like just random questions, but let
Yeah.
me first ask you, what is the most common question or misconception you get?
Oh, I would say patients referring to themselves as guinea pigs. That is something that I hear you. I know why you're saying that, but like I really hate it. Like I absolutely don't think of you as a guinea pig. This is something we're trying to do to help you. We are trying to support you. We are not, yes, you are a clinical trial participant, but you are a patient first. You are, still our priority is your well-being and doing first do no harm, right? As they say. And so I think that that is something that I hear more often than I would like. And I think that in having that conversation from that juncture of saying, I hear you and I hear why you think that, but this is let me explain to you how this really works and what this might look like for you. And it's such an important conversation, and I constantly tell patients in the beginning, it is a lot up front. It is so much. It is so overwhelming to even think about enrolling in a clinical trial, and then you make the decision, and then you have to do all this stuff, and you kind of have to like, sometimes you have to, do extra tests, things that are taking away your time from your life, and it can be so busy in the beginning, even when you go on the trial, we're watching you so closely. But then hopefully, eventually, it gets easier, right? The schedule spaces out, you don't have to come in as much, and you're on a good treatment. And we know you're safe, and we know you're responding. And if that isn't what happens, and things, we need to look at another path, then we're going to look at another path for you. So we're never going to have you continue something that is not in your best interest.
The
Um,
bad news is you have to go in more often. The good news is you're being evaluated more often.
right.
And again, from my personal experience, is like when I've been released from my doctor, and I'm like, well, yeah, but like, can't we just still get together just in case? Like, it's a sense of
Yeah.
abandonment. And really, you're being looked at more in a closer way. And that's a
Mhm.
good thing so that you're catching something sooner so you can do something next.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, I am fortunate enough to have some long-term patients that I see, and in addition to knowing them and their cancer journey, I know so much about their family and their lives, and it's really nice to have a relationship like that. And even from the more technical perspective of trial safety and efficacy, like I know I'm listening to your lungs every week. I know if there's something a little different because I've been listening to your lungs every week for a long time now, and I can tell it might be a little nuanced difference, but because I'm watching you so closely, there's more likelihood that if something's changing, we catch it and we can act quickly.
Well, it's a different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not been through a clinical trial, but it's a different relationship to see somebody on an ongoing basis. I see a physical therapist once a week. My physical therapist knows me a whole lot more than my oncologist, who doesn't see me every single week. And so she'll pick up on something much faster because of that sort of physical nuance, the relationship. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I gotta say, like all these conferences I've been to and all the experts and HCPs I've met across all the channels, you guys really care so much about us as people. We happen to be patients.
Mm-hmm.
And that really shines through in some people more than others. And I listened to the true respect that y'all have for the patients that have participated in these trials in order to be moved forward. And we didn't want to need a trial, okay, to begin with, right? And you didn't want us to need it either, but at least we had something to go to and make that plan. And so it's really, it's very powerful, I think, and it's just a different relationship. I don't have, if I only saw my husband once a week or every 3 months, it's a different relationship than seeing the guy every single day. And so I can pick up on the different nuance. Now, fill in the blank there, but it's the same thing in these. And so I don't think it's a guinea pig situation, but it is worthwhile for me to just mention we're going to the University California in San Francisco, and we're doing a lab tour at Kayvon Choquette and Frank McCormick's labs. And, they are like the who's who in KRAS in February. And so this is something that patients and care partners, I mean, we're working very, very hard behind the scenes in order to put this event together. And it's free for patients and care partners. Thanks in many ways for our sponsors. So go to the website and get the information and sign up. We'll have moments that are recorded, but this is not live stream. You have to be there to see it and feel it. And you get to see those labs. And let me tell you what, in that lab and hearing from the people that are working with the test tubes as they're moving things through the process is just amazing. And then we talk, David Hong from Anderson, MD Anderson will be there. And we have Ignacio Laguna from Utah that will be there as well. And you listen to what they're talking about through the trials, and it's just amazing what's happening and how we can be have options, okay, of like life, right? It's not like we just have to give up. We've got a reason to fight. So anyway, I'm gonna get all on a soapbox or something here.
No, that sounds awesome. That'd be
But it's true.
great.
So let me see. All right. So let me see. We had a couple other questions that popped in here. If someone has like, I'm just going to read it flat out, see what it says. Somebody has a G12V mutation, the trial physician appointment recommended a trial, but a 3-month rate. They also have a second mutation with another trial study, but it was not as highly recommended. Can you start one trial and then switch to the first trial?
Well, it would depend how the eligibility criteria was worded, but in theory, yes, as long as it wasn't an exclusion criteria that you couldn't have one drug and then the other. But certainly I, as I mentioned earlier, it's trials are voluntary. You can change your mind anytime. You can be doing in the screening, you can be on treatment. You can say, I don't want to do this anymore for whatever reason. That's okay. You can stop. Um, so I think the bigger issue would be how the subsequent study would word their criteria about it. Would you have had to had progression on that other drug? Unlikely. If it's a trial drug, they're probably not gonna, say that. But we do sometimes see in trials the language of you have to have progressed on, for example, platinum chemo and immunotherapy to be eligible for this trial. So there are, certain drugs you must have had sometimes, and there's certain drugs that you must have not had sometimes.
So it depends specifically on the protocol of what's within the trial, of what it is.
Mhm.
You always have the flexibility and option to say, "This, and I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore,"
Mhm.
which is very powerful. But once you're out, that's it. Because it's like
Yes,
once you're,
that's true. That's
once you're
true.
out, that's it.
There's
You
no
don't get to
going
say,
back.
"Oh, never mind. I changed my mind."
Yeah, no, that is true. It's not a decision to be made lightly because you really can't go back. And I always tell patients, unless you're not tolerating this, let's just wait and see how the scan looks. Because I don't want you to walk away from something that might be helping, I just because. And I hate using the word tolerate, because I think that's so patient subjective and it's different from person to person what's tolerable, quote unquote. But if we can if we can support you through this in a way where it's not impacting your quality of life, you feel that this is manageable. Let's wait and see how the scan looks before we make any changes.
Yeah, it's tolerable is one of those words. It's like, can I really deal with this? Well, at
Mhm.
least let's take a peek inside and see what the scans look like.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. So essentially what you're saying is that if you're yeah, if you can be considered for two different trials, you're going to be very intentional about the strategy about which one you're going to be doing first or second, because there's a lot of times where you're just going to be excluded from one or the other based on something that's happening in that trial, whether it's a washout period, it's a type of medication, it's something. And and at the same time, there's always a possibility that what you chose is working great. And so you don't need anything else, right? I mean, that's the perfect scenario.
Right. And I don't think this is a decision you should, be having to make on your own by any stretch. I think this is a dialogue with your healthcare team about, how these different trials are structured. And, a lot of these things are so complicated. You really need someone who is inside and can tell you, how exactly each trial would work.
Well, the important thing is asking the question.
Right.
It's
Hmm.
your body, and it's okay to ask the question so you have a sense of understanding about it.
Hmm.
And that's harder for some people than others. It really
Absolutely.
is. It really is. But it does bring up an excellent question that was posted in the chat. It's like, if I'm being treated at an NCI academic institution, is it reasonable to get a second opinion in another NCI institution? How objective or subjective is that?
Absolutely. We're not all running the same trials. I think that the NCI designation is really just a reflection of a lot of things, but one of those things is commitment to research and really bringing some of the best trials to our patients. We have to demonstrate our research capabilities to keep that designation, right? We strive for it and that's a piece of our designation, and it's a big piece is the research. So I think that we are all doing we all have the same overarching goal, but some of the trials and the way we do things are different. So absolutely, and we have a lot of collaboration between sites as well. The oncology community, I think, is extremely collegiate with each other in terms of, hey, I don't have a trial for you, but I know this guy and he has a trial for you, or this girl, and and I can get you get you in with this with so and so. Who might have a trial for you, and let me call them first and see if they have that and if there's slots. Otherwise, we're not going to waste our time. So, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on among the different oncologists, among different healthcare centers and NCI designated centers.
And I have to say, a surprising amount of collaboration
Yeah,
goes on.
yeah.
It's not it's not, I'm going to say that it's not, I get the sense that a doctor is saying the same thing because they're golfing buddies. They actually are like two dogs that like to argue back and forth over a chew stick. I mean, I hear the conversations that they're having, and it's like, well, you could do this, well, then this, well, and it's going back and forth. And they really do the peer reviews, they take them very seriously.
Mhm.
And that's it's actually gives me a lot more confidence in the system that I'm not just getting somebody's like, yeah, well, Joe, of course, Joe said that. I'm down with that. And it's like, oh, good to see Sally again. It's like, no, it's not just because of them. It's like, no, they really want to look back and push back at it. And the more area of expertise, the more it brings up those opportunities for a conversation. And they love reaching out to each other. They love having a reason to talk to each other.
Well, that is true. But
Yes.
also, I would say, when pharmaceutical companies open trials, they don't open them at every center in, the country or the world, right? They have a select number of sites where they can enroll. So as much as we all want every amazing trial that's coming down the pipeline, like it's not possible. We can't. So that's part of, I think, what drives the collaborative environment in the community is to say, well, we couldn't get this trial, but I think it's a really great trial, and I think you should look at it over here. I think that again, in an ideal world, we would all have every amazing trial that was coming, but it's just doesn't work out that way.
Well, it's not practical.
Right.
I mean, from anybody's point of view, it's just not practical.
Yeah.
And that's kind of hard to accept because I only want to go this far away, right?
Right.
So yeah, so we still getting questions, just so you know.
Okay,
So
good.
I'm just going to keep hitting them up. Let's say, what's it like with a popular trial? I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, I think as you mentioned earlier, that we have some really exciting KRAS drugs that are popular. And for good reason. Some of these drugs are amazing, and we do have some of these trials open, and it's just so satisfying, and it just makes me so happy to see a patient go on a trial and it really works and they're doing so well. And personally, professionally, it's why I love my job. I mean, working in phase one is really hard because a lot of times, these drugs don't work and they don't get past the phase one, phase two. Again, they all have to start there, but they don't all make it past there. So when we have these exciting drugs that are really working and you can see it, and it's wonderful. But it is also a little frustrating, again, that we can't give these drugs to everyone, and there's only a limited number of slots, and the competitive enrollment within all the different sites. So I would say it's a blessing more than anything, but it also does come with a fair number of challenges.
Yeah, and it's not like there's no secret code somewhere that's like this is what the availability is, and if you just go to this place, this is or whatever. It makes me think of like the old Beanie Baby thing. I mean, I knew people. I'm dating myself, right? But I mean, they would like go like stand in these crazy lines to get Beanie Babies or something, and it's not like that. There's no secret code behind it. You have a sense of it, but there's no secret place and get the information. What's
Yeah.
open. So what are some really good specific questions that should be asked if I'm being considered for a clinical trial?
Um, well, I think the most important question is probably, why do you think this trial is a good option for me? Um, and I think that oncologists will be frank as to, the likelihood that a trial is or is not a right fit for you. Um, I think understanding what the commitments are for that trial are important. How often do I need to be here? What kind of side effects can I expect? Is there anything about my case that, would uh, make me not a good candidate? For example, in the immunotherapy arena, we often worry about patients who have autoimmune disease. So, is there something in my history that might make this a riskier choice for me? Um, so I think those are probably good starting points. And again, I would really read over in detail any consent form that you're given, and take time with that consent form. Really read it, discuss it with friends and family, see what kind of questions you have after reading that.
Well, and also there's certain things like besides grapefruit juice and other things that you may or may
Hmm.
not be able to have that you may not want to be able to live without or what have you.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to read this question straight out of the chat. Okay. So this person asks, so I found a trial that I'm perfect for. It just began. I'm terminal and I've already moved 3 times this year to access care. I'm not having any luck with my clinic or with the pharmaceutical company. I'm not going to name names. This could be life or death for me? What can I do? What can you do to help me? And what should I do?
Um, well, without reviewing any specifics to your case, I really couldn't speak to what it is that I could do specifically, but we mentioned earlier finding where these trials are, and it sounds like that you have done that. Um, and I would be curious, what if there was another institution that you could consider, if there was someone at that institution, another contact you could find to reach out to. Um, I think it's really hard with a specific case like that, to not knowing the details, to really offer too much
Well, and
guidance.
at the same time, I mean, it doesn't even really matter like the company. So here's what I've learned from this, okay? From
Mhm.
somebody who hasn't had a clinical trial.
Mhm.
If you reach out to a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company,
Mhm.
they can't give you the drug directly. You have to go through an institution, you have to go through an oncologist. And if it's only available in a clinical trial, you have to go through that proper protocol. From
Mhm.
them to even have what could be possibly considered an inappropriate conversation, if the drug could cure everything, it'll shut everything down. The FDA and the powers that be just come in and basically lock up the doors until they prove otherwise. And so it's just a safe, it's supposed to be that checks and balance, the safety valve. I
Mhm.
might be, am I over exaggerating or oversimplifying it all, Laura?
No, no. I mean, I think that is correct. You have to go through the institutions that have the trials. How each institution operates in terms of getting new patients in is institution specific. I think that if you call to make a new patient appointment, with whoever is listed as the primary investigator on that trial, I think that's a good way to start it. And if that person is not accepting new patients, could there be another provider that you could see there? I think that trial eligibility evaluation often does have to be done in person. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, I think in this day and age with telehealth being kind of under the gun and the rules are changing, telehealth hopefully is here to stay, but almost never in a new patient context. Telehealth is often just restricted to follow-up patients. So
Well, and you can't give medical advice unless you've seen the patient and
correct.
reviewed the records, and that's only good medicine. But when we're out here and we're desperate and we're scared, it's really tough bullet to bite.
Yeah,
It's
I
really tough.
understand.
So, so I appreciate the question, and I wish there was like some simple way of being able to manage it. So, oh my gosh, it's like the follow-up question was, do I move endlessly chasing a trial? Um, I'm not gonna put you on the spot to answer that question, but I will tell you, I've known a number of people, um, and talk, I mean, like friends, like cancer patients that are friends of mine that have literally moved across the country a number of different times, specifically for a clinical trial. And, that's a life choice. And, and you have to feel comfortable, or have some confidence in that. And that's, at the end of the day, your doctor can't die for you, and the trial can't die for you. And so it's your life. You need to make your life decisions. And that's hard. It's hard to do because we want to have something simple. And I wish I could hand out cures. I wish I could hand out cures or even just really solid treatments. That'd be okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say certainly, don't move unless you know that you could enroll in the trial. I think you could go for a consult. Just get that initial consult going so that they see you, they see your case, they see your records, and then if it looks like yes, this is a fit, this is a great trial for you, just like it seems like it is amazing, perfect. How do you make it work? Do you have to then move there? Could you get a temporary location there? Is it the kind of trial where there is money in the budget from the sponsor where they will pay for travel accommodations? That does happen from time to time. It depends on how big of a trial it is and what the specific budget is. But we certainly do have patients come see us at Georgetown from various places. And we talk about how would we make this work. So I think traveling for an initial consult is probably more a reasonable approach than moving around, at least initially to get a sense of whether or not you have a real option there.
Well, and it's financially limiting.
Right.
I mean, and so that doesn't even take into consideration just take insurance out of it because I don't want to touch that sticky wicket. But just taking the
Mhm.
insurance part out of it, like there's still the transportation, getting there back and forth, and where I'm going to stay, and all the other like just normal life things that you
Mhm.
have going on. And so, I feel for everybody in this situation, and I know that there are other people do as well. But and just heads up. If you don't already know, and I'm not going to keep you much longer, Laura, but if you don't know, the clinics, they have a clinical trials list on their individual websites. They're not always as updated as they can be or should be, but if you're looking for something to see what's there, it's quite possible that it's there on that website. And so get a feel for it. And if you're only willing to go to the New York metro area or whatever, then don't look in Charlotte, North Carolina or whatever, right? I mean, like, yet, be realistic with yourself too, which is just incredibly difficult. um I think there was another question here that was like really great questions. I mean, there's great questions over here already. And so um real fast, just we're gonna like lightning round, and then I'm gonna let you go, Laura. Okay. um Lightning round. How long do trials usually stay open? How long do I have to reach out to the coordinator?
Are those different questions?
Well, it's kind of the same thing though. It's like, so, I'm just trying to, I guess I want to honor the question,
Yeah.
and at the same time, I also, it's after 6 o'clock. So
Yes. So how long? It really depends. Had trials open and close pretty quickly. And we've had trials open for 10 years. It's depends on the drug, it depends on the company, it depends on how many sites there are, how is enrollment going. Some of the more rare tumors that are harder to enroll are they're gone going forever. So I think it's always worth an ask.
okay. And then last question for the night. Okay. So if you're in one of those trials and it's working, but
Mhm.
like let's just say you're one of the outliers, right? Let's say you're in one of those phase 1, phase 2 trials, and you're still going 20 years later. Okay, right? Or 30 years later. Let's dream the life, right? Let's say 30 years later.
Okay.
What happens? I mean, the trial ends. I mean, how do I get this drug? What does that look like?
Oh, such a
And
good
again,
question.
I know it's a lightning round, so
No, it's a really, really good question. I have seen it happen where a drug gets approved and the sponsor wants to keep the trial open anyway, because they want more data. And so they either keep open their current trial or they turn it into what's like an umbrella trial where they pull all the other trials that were looking at this drug into a much um, easier, lighter trial where they're still collecting some data, and you're still getting the drug. Um, I've seen it where sponsors will continue to provide drug if the insurance does not approve it, and the patient's been on the trial. Um, in a worst case scenario, I have also seen it where they just say, "Hey, we're a small company. We can't make this drug anymore. That's it." So, and that's the worst. But that is not something I've seen happen often. More often than not, if you have a drug that is working for you, it's probably working for some other people with any luck. Usually they find a way to have you keep getting access to that.
Funny story that we'll end with. I know somebody that was some sort of an outlier, and I can't even tell you the name of the drug.
Okay.
And I don't because I don't remember. And the company was like, they ended up, it's like they were the only person still going. It was some very small trial. But they were like the only person still responding. And it was like some crazy amount of time, like 30 years. And they said, well, we're going to stop manufacturing this drug. And so they like did a last run of this drug. So this person could live, I don't know, not infinitely, but it was a huge amount of time so they could have what they needed for it before they closed in the trial. And so when I hear, the accusation of heartless and this thing and that thing, there's so much heart and so much care every step of the way. I'm not saying things don't get in the way and politics and numbers and again, numbers and legalities, right? Um, Everything gets in the way, but at the same time, I mean, people are really out there and we're really trying to help every step of the way. So with
Mhm.
that, you are one of those people, Laura.
Oh, thank
And on
you.
behalf of me and the community, we had people in here, they're saying, thank you so much for helping because you really, really did help provide some of the information to us. And I did just do this live on Facebook too at the same time we were doing this. So and we'll have a recording and we'll put it up on the YouTube video. But thank you so much for answering our questions, being tolerant with us, and explaining clinical trials to us all. It's just been really a delight. And I'm hoping I get to see you again in person really soon.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion. Thanks so much for having me.
It was a pleasure. Okay, and with that, thank you all for being here. And I'm Terri Conneran with KRAS Kickers, and let's keep kicking cancer's grass, right? Okay, bye now. Thank you.